Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Abby Bronson from PPMD, and I'm delighted to be able to introduce this afternoon's webinar by PTC on Translarna, which many of you also know as ataluren, its generic name. What PTC will present this afternoon is an overview of the Translarna development program with a focus on the clinical trials that are approved. And just a little housekeeping before I introduce our speaker. I want to make sure you know that we'll have time for questions at the end of the presentation. So if you have a question, you need more clarity on something, submit your question in the chat box, and we always try to answer as many questions as we can online, and then any that we don't answer, we'll get to by email after the webinar is done, and we'll post. This webinar is being recorded, so we'll post it, and we'll have the questions posted as well. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Francesco Bibbiani, MD, who's the VP of Clinical Development at PTC Therapeutics. Dr. Bibbiani is a board-certified neurologist with over 20 years of experience in clinical development between the pharmaceutical industry and the experimental therapeutic branch of the National Institutes of Health, where he conducted proof-of-concept trials in several neurological indications. In his past position, Francesco conducted various clinical trials in Huntington's disease, Alzheimer's disease, and epilepsy, all studies that led to multiple regulatory submissions and approvals with the FDA, EMA, and other global regulatory agencies. Currently, he is the Vice President of Clinical Development at PTC Therapeutics, where he leads the neurological therapeutic area. So he is well qualified to be leading this program at PTC. So I will now turn it over to Francesco.
Thanks, Abby. Thanks very much, and welcome everybody. Today we'll look in a little bit at PTC, about talking about the company, who we are, an overview of our lead compound, which is ataluren, as known as Translarna, and then an overview of the clinical studies that are currently ongoing. One is the confirmatory double-blind efficacy study of ataluren, which is known as the Study 41, and then the two dystrophin studies of ataluren. And then we will have time, as Abby said, for questions and answers. PTC was founded around the discovery and development of ataluren, and it is committed to the development of drugs in the DMD and in the rare disorder arenas. We have our headquarters in South Plainfield, New Jersey, with other major offices in Zug, Switzerland, in Dublin, Ireland, and for the Latin America region in São Paulo, Brazil. PTC is the leader in the treatment of DMD with two approved products, Translarna and Emflaza. Translarna is the first ever targeted therapeutic approved in DMD anywhere in the world, and it is now available in over 40 countries outside the U.S., and it is in clinical trials currently in the U.S. for potential approval in 2020. The other compound is Emflaza, which is the first and only corticosteroids approved specifically for DMD anywhere in the world, with approval in the U.S. in 2017. So with these two drugs, PTC has a DMD franchise that is now helping many thousands of families living with Duchenne around the world. Looking a bit at the ataluren overview. Ataluren is conditionally approved in Europe for ambulatory patients 2 years and older with DMD caused by a nonsense mutation. It is available to boys in over 40 countries through a commercial and a free of charge programs. There is a clear pathway to approval in U.S. By conducting additional trials, as we will describe in these presentations. Not being approved in the U.S., it is considered here an investigational product. This is how Translarna works. Here you see how the ribosomes read the RNA strand. Normally, each triplet of bases of the RNA codes for specific amino acids. In case of Duchenne, a nonsense mutation changes one of the bases of the triplets, resulting in a modified triplet that codes for a premature stop instead of a normal amino acid. With Translarna, we allow the read-through to this fake premature stop codon and allows for the formation of a full length and functioning dystrophin protein. Currently, we have 3 ataluren trials that are enrolling boys with DMD caused by nonsense mutation. The first one is the Study 41, the confirmatory study of efficacy and safety. And then we have 2 dystrophin studies, one for boys that are currently treated with ataluren and one for ataluren-naive boys, so the boys that have not ever received ataluren in the past. So let's start with Study 41 and an overview of this confirmatory trial of efficacy and safety of ataluren. So Study 41 is critical for the future of Translarna. It is the condition which needs to be fulfilled in order to obtain full approval in Europe. And it will also be used for all other submissions for approval worldwide. We have currently 70 study sites that are located around the world, of which 23 are in the United States. Trial 41 is composed of 2 periods. One is a 72-week placebo-control period, which is a double-blind part of the study, in which all the participants will receive ataluren or placebo in a 1-to-1 ratio, half and half. At the end of the placebo-control period, all boys will receive ataluren in the extension, which will be an open label, so there will be no placebo, no blinding. The total of the study is 144 weeks, which is approximately 3 years. It is a considerably longer study than what had been conducted in the past. Usually studies of this type are about 48 weeks. So we hope with this long-term study to be able to detect differences with a higher sensitivity than previous trials have done. The primary objective of the study is to determine the effect of ataluren on the motor function, on the ambulation, as assessed by the 6-minute walking test, and also by other functional assessments that will be considered a secondary analysis, like the TFTs or the North Star assessment. Ataluren will be dosed on a 10-10-20 regimen, which is the regimen being used in all the previous clinical trials, which means 10 milligram per kilogram in the morning, 10 milligram per kilogram at midday, and 20 milligram per kilogram in the evening. All boys enrolled in the study that will need to travel will be reimbursed for the travel expenses for all the enrolled boys. The inclusion criteria for Study 41 are common to the previous trial that have been conducted. So they have to be male and age 5 and above. There has to be a documented nonsense mutation by gene sequencing. Also, these boys have to be on a systemic corticosteroid treatment for at least 12 months, of which the last 3 have to be stable, and also with the reasonable expectations that no changing will be expected, at least in the double-blind portion of the study, the first 72 weeks. Patients will have to be ambulatory with the ability to perform these physical tests and time function tests. Also, they have to be willing to enable to comply with the visits, the study administration, and the study procedures. In terms of exclusions, any change in the prophylaxis or treatment for cardiomyopathy within 1 month prior to study treatment. If any change to this medication is necessary, this patient could be adjusted to the new regimen and wait a month, and then they will be ready for enrollment. Some treatments that are known to interact with ataluren, and there are very few, are an exclusion criterion, and we are referring in particular to IV aminoglycoside or IV vancomycin treatments. Clearly, these patients cannot have been exposed to ataluren in the past or have any known hypersensitivity to any of the ingredients of the drug. Ongoing immunosuppressive therapy is not allowed except for the corticosteroidal treatment, and any exposure to investigational drug within 6 months prior to study participation is also not allowed. History of major surgical procedures within 12 weeks prior to study start are not allowed, and also if a boy is expected to have a major surgical procedure in the near future, especially in the double-blind portion of the study, that is also not allowed. Another criteria for exclusion is the requirement for daytime ventilator or invasive mechanical ventilation by a tracheostomy. There are currently 23 study sites in the United States, with other sites that are currently being enrolled for recruitment. Here you see a list of the sites that are currently participating, and you can always find an updated list at the www.clinicaltrials.gov, where all the new sites will be promptly updated once they are ready to enroll. Moving into the dystrophy studies, as we said, we have 2 studies. One that is dedicated to boys who have never received ataluren in the past, so naive to ataluren, and the other to boys who are currently on ataluren treatment. Dystrophy studies are the results of our negotiation with the regulatory authorities in the U.S. and are conducted to demonstrate the production of dystrophin after treatment with ataluren. The studies are the expression of our commitment to bring ataluren to the U.S. boys. As we said, we have 2 different groups that will be studied. The one naive to ataluren, which is study 45, and then the boys who have been on ataluren for a longer period, at least 9 months, and that is referred as study 46. Both of these studies will be conducted in the U.S. only. Both of these studies will be open-label, single-arm, to evaluate the ability of ataluren to increase dystrophin protein after a set period, which is 40 weeks of treatment with ataluren. There will be, as I said, it's an open-label. There will be no placebo phase or arm. Patients that have not been on ataluren in the past will receive 40 weeks of treatment with ataluren. The dosing regimen will be 10-10-20, as in the previous studies. The production of dystrophin will be measured via needle biopsies, and which will evaluate the actual dystrophin production after treatment. For the inclusion criteria, they are similar to the previous studies. The boys, so participants have to be male. For those who are ataluren naive, the range of age is between 2 and 7, so they must have not had their 8th birthday at the time of screening. And for the boys currently taking ataluren, the inclusion is not done by an age range, but by more like a functional definition. So these boys have to be ambulatory and able to raise both arms above their head. They have to have a documented nonsense mutation with the gene sequencing, and willing to undergo the muscle biopsy. And the other study required visits and drug administration and so on. And for the boys already receiving ataluren, they had to be receiving the drug for at least 9 months or more. And there's no, with no gap interruption of more than 1 month. For the exclusion criteria, they're pretty much the standard for all the studies with ataluren. Any known contraindication to muscle biopsy, this is specific for the study. If, for example, a boy has a tendency to bleeding or clotting disorder. The other are pretty common for the rest of the studies. Ongoing treatment with drugs that are not compatible with ataluren, the IV aminoglycoside or IV vancomycin, any known hypersensitivity to ingredients or excipients of the drug, or an exposure to an investigational drug within 2 months. And also the requirement for a daytime ventilator assistance, as in the previous studies. Although the BPAP therapy is allowed. So both these studies are going to use a biopsy to quantify the production of dystrophy, but it will not be a traditional open muscle biopsy like it was common in the past, and it's a very invasive procedure. We will use a needle muscle biopsy, which is a technique being pioneered by Dr. Nelson at UCLA. It is done with a needle and a vacuum system that extracts a little core of muscle from the muscles that are investigated. The muscles that are investigated are the right bicep and the right gastrocnemius. If the right bicep muscle is considered by the investigator to be too small, the right tibialis anterior will be used instead. So once the needle is inserted into the muscle, it will extract one core of muscle, and then the needle will be moved around 3 times, 2 more times, in order to collect 3 small core of muscles for each of the investigated muscles. Caution sedation will be offered, and following sedation, these boys will be followed until they return to the baseline conditions. In terms of visits, that depends on the type of which one of these different studies the boys are enrolled into. So for everybody, the studies will be conducted at Dr. Nelson's site at UCLA. For everybody, again, the travel to LA will be reimbursed, and additional supplementation for time will also be provided. For the ataluren naive group, there will be 3 visits. The first visit where the boys will do the first biopsy, and then they will start their ataluren treatment. A second visit will follow where the boys will be investigated for side effects of the drug and eventually adjustment made. And then eventually at the end of the 40 weeks of the ataluren treatment, the boys will do the last biopsy to see if there's an increase of dystrophin production. For the group that has been already receiving ataluren, there will be only 1 visit, still at Dr. Nelson's site at UCLA. In this visit, boys will get the biopsy and have some assessment done, mostly the motor functions. And then they will go back to their treating physicians and continue treatment as based on their own regular schedule. For the dystrophin studies, we have currently 10 sites in the U.S., and here is a list of the 10 sites, and additional sites and updates will be found again at clinicaltrials.gov. This is a summary of the 3 studies that we just looked into. The study 41, the confirmatory trial, 72 weeks followed by 72-week Openlabel, the requirements, and then the 2 dystrophin studies for the boys who are never received ataluren before, and for the boys who are already in ataluren treatment. If you would like to participate, you can review the inclusion-exclusion with your physician and confirm that the mutation is a nonsense mutation. So if you feel that a son is a candidate, you can contact one of the sites that are listed in the clinicaltrials.gov, or specifically for Study 41, we have a dedicated website, which is www.dndstudy041.com. For the dystrophin studies, you can always refer to the clinicaltrials.gov, where all the sites updated will be listed. If there's any additional questions, you can address the questions to Mary Frances Harmon at the email reported here. All right, and we are available for questions.
Abby, you can start the questions.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. I was just talking to myself. That was a great overview. I think that was really informative for everybody. Can we go back to the previous slide? Because that's kind of a nice overview. It puts the 3 studies up there. So first of all, I might have missed it. Did you say how many participants you're recruiting for each of these studies?
Yes. No, actually, I haven't said it. But so for the Study 41, we are looking to get at least 250 patients. For the dystrophin studies, of course, this will be much smaller. We're looking about 15 subjects in Study 41, which is for the patients that have never received ataluren, and for the boys that are currently on ataluren, we're looking at even smaller number, maybe 6 to 8.
Okay. And for the boys that are currently on ataluren, because you're only taking one biopsy, so you must be making a comparison. Are you just doing the absolute quantification of how much dystrophin's in there? There's no comparison to like the naive group or anything?
Right.
What's the rationale?
In boys around this age, or boys with BMD, we would expect to see very little, if any, dystrophin. Therefore, the study is done really to assess if there's any production whatsoever. Okay. Just seeing dystrophin would be a pretty good indication that the treatment is effective.
Okay. Yeah, because I was also wondering, because the length of time for study 041, which is basically 3 years, right? Okay. So that's when you expect to see clinical benefit, is after 3 years?
No. We have done studies in the past that have been of shorter duration. Usually the typical pivotal study duration is 48 weeks.
Okay.
As you know, probably we missed on the primary endpoints. In this case, we built the study to really minimize the chance of not detecting a difference. So we did it by enriching the population in what we consider the transitional phase. So the primary endpoint will be done on a subset of the study population. So these will be patients that have a 6-minute walking distance, about 300, and a race from supine and a stand from supine of less than 5 seconds. So we identified a smaller group to calculate the primary endpoint, where the participants are in a stable decline. So we don't have in the primary endpoint the boys that are too stable or the boys that are close to losing ambulation. But we enroll everybody, obviously. And also the duration of the study being longer allows us to see more of a change over time and therefore being able to better detect the difference.
Mm-hmm. So, and this relates to a couple questions that came in about the first 72 weeks in phase 1, where there is a placebo arm. And of course, you know, time is of the essence for every single person listening to this webinar. Is there any possibility that first 72 weeks could be shortened if there's some interim analysis done that shows great data, so that the placebo arm could be flipped earlier? I just, that was just a question that came in.
Right. No, it's very much understandable. It's very difficult to run a double-blind placebo-controlled study of that duration. The problem is exactly that. So the primary endpoint focuses on the double-blind portion of the study. And that's why we decided to go from the typical 48 weeks and prolong it a little bit, just to be able to detect a difference in the double-blind phase.
But this time, hopefully, it will be definitive results one way or the other. So that's a good thing.
Yes.
So I have a question. So because this is a longer study, and I was looking at your inclusion criteria, listening to them. I mean, do you think that 3-year window, there's a greater likelihood that some boys might go off their feet or no longer be able to complete the 6-minute walk test? I mean, how did that factor into your consideration as you design the trial?
It is possible. 3 years is a long period. So the change from baseline, the loss of ambulation from baseline would be definitely another endpoint, although not one of the primary or secondary, but something that will be taken into consideration to show efficacy.
Okay. So we have some questions about, I think that we all think about, I don't want to use the word cure, but the best treatment possible for this disease as being, a combination of treatments or, even 3 or 4 or more. Have you done any work as to combining Translarna with any other therapies that are currently in development?
What we do is requiring all boys to be on concomitant corticosteroid treatment, which is pretty much the gold standard of the treatment right now. So these are the only 2 treatments that we have been combining. Other than that, we haven't combined with anything else that is that is recognized to have an effect on DMD, non-transmutation DMD at least.
And is there, thank you. Is there any, are there any development efforts to do a second generation ataluren or improve upon its efficacy?
It is possible. I wouldn't say that it's not something it is considered. Currently, the focus is really to bring ataluren to the U.S. boys and focus on the approval as early as possible. That's the main focus point.
Okay. So going back, we have another question coming in. Can you go over in the dystrophin studies, the rationale again for the currently using ataluren study, and there's only one needle biopsy being taken, and that's in about, like you said, 6 to 8 boys, I believe. What exactly is that going to confirm? I think there's some questions about that.
It is very understandable. So when we think of studies like that, the clear path is really having a comparison. So you do a before treatment and then an after treatment, right? That's like what the first study is like.
Right.
This is a study that is going to take a considerable amount of time. We wanted to generate some data that gives us indication and support it indication of efficacy. So we will have the study 45 and then a supportive indication of study 46. So again, in DMD boys, except for rare occasions, we would expect almost no dystrophy in their biopsies. So if you have a patient, if you have a voice that is being treated for a long period of time with ataluren, and we do see dystrophin production, that is already an indication of efficacy of the drug. Might or might not be sufficient on its own, but definitely will be able to support the study 45 in that.
So just any level of dystrophin production is evidence of
will be an
supportive evidence of the drug working.
If in all 6-8 boys we see dystrophin production, there's clearly a drug effect. Otherwise, commonly there's very little, if any, dystrophin observed at the biopsies.
Okay. So are BMD boys excluded from these studies?
All the other outside nonsense mutation?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because ataluren wouldn't be a factor.
Right, you have to have, okay. And what about in Canada? Can you tell us what's happening in Canada? And are there any Canadian sites?
For the dystrophic studies or for study 4?
All of them.
We do have sites for study 41, and because of the dystrophin studies are all revolving around the UCLA site, we would consider having Canadian patients going to Dr. Nelson site. But that's basically the only open site. Even for the drug naive boys, the sites are all referring, and the biopsies are all done at Dr. Nelson. So boys from Canada can go to Dr. Nelson. That's kind of feasible, but going ex-US and Canada will be a little more complicated. But we definitely would accept boys from Canada if they're willing to have the biopsy done at Dr. Nelson's site at UCLA.
Okay, and if they could do it, would travel be covered for those Canadian boys?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. And is PTC planning on submitting a marketing application to the Canadian Health Authority?
It is already under review.
Okay, great. There was another question that someone had asked about, and I did not look up this exact press release, but there was a PTC press release in October that related to clinical data, and it showed that patients on ataluren had a median age of loss of ambulation of 16.5 years. And I think in general, we think that that's probably quite a bit longer than what's currently reported out of natural history studies. So could you just talk a little bit about that?
Yes. This derives, it actually derives from 2 studies, but most of all, the press release was relative to the study 19. The study 19 was the long-term extension where boys that were in previous trial, where at the end of their extension, were moved into this very, very long term extension study that was called study 19. So these boys were followed for many years. So we were able to detect long-term endpoints like loss of ambulation or, for example, breathing abilities. And we did found a difference compared to the natural control studies, that there was a prolongation of the time these boys were able to be ambulant compared to natural history. And also that was also observed in terms of the FVC, which is the ventilatory ability. These data were also confirmed in a registry study that it's running in Europe, and that's also a long-term extension where we looked at loss of ambulation, and we saw that boys on the long term were gaining. And what was even more interesting is that the longer these boys were on treatment, the better the benefits. And this is currently being submitted for review to the European agency, but it's not. It's not published. That's what I meant.
Excuse me, I didn't hear that last part. It's been submitted to the European.
It's under review also by the regulatory authorities in Europe.
Okay. All right. So there's a question about the randomization to treatment versus placebo. And I think in 041 you said it was 1-to-1. Did that somehow, someone saying that it was like 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 before, did this change sometime? Or is this study was always written with this randomization?
No, it's 1-to-1.
Yeah. So, and were any previous studies different randomization schemes?
No.
No. Okay.
No, any pivotal, it's usually done to a 1-to-1 ratio.
Okay. Because someone's asking, saying that the original 41 trial, the ratio was different, but perhaps that was a different study. So I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, no, not on 41.
So what about timing? When do you have these studies started already? And when do you think the last patient might be in? And what are some of the expectations for some of the timing of all this?
Right. So study 41 has been enrolling since since August 2017. We still have at least 6 more months for enrollment. Then the dystrophin studies are at the very early stage where the study 45 has one subject that is randomized, and the study 46 is currently going through IRB review at Dr. Matson's site. So they're both in very early stage. So boys that intend to participate, they have plenty of time ahead.
Okay, but those are both shorter studies. The dystrophin studies are shorter than the 41. So they might if you have 6 more months of recruiting for the study 41, and then they'll have 3 years. So that's we're looking pretty far out to get some results on that one.
That's right.
Okay. There's a question about an older boy. If you're already on ataluren, how long do you have to have been on a steroid in order to be considered? And there's somebody who's doing so well, he's no longer taking steroids. So would he be eligible for the study?
So, for the 41 study, you're saying, for the 41 study, all boys have to be on steroids for at least 12 months and currently on it. So if the boy is no longer on steroids, unfortunately will not be eligible.
Okay. I'm trying to see what other, here's back up here. So there's somebody who's wondering, they're in the study right now. He's starting a new treatment for cardiomyopathy, and what will that do to his eligibility to remain in the study?
It only needs to be stable for a month. So if there's a new treatment or a change in those of an existing treatment, the only thing the boy needs to do is having that treatment stabilized for 30 days and then becomes eligible for the study.
So what happens
all the other conditions.
So what happens if he's already in the study?
If it is already in the study,
mm-hmm.
Well, of course, safety is the main concern. So if one boy that is already in the study needs to have an adjustment, obviously we'll have an adjustment. it will be recorded as a study deviation. But, the first thing is the boy's safety. So obviously it's okay.
Okay.
Every effort should be made not to, but if that happens, it's obviously the priority.
And so someone's wondering about I think there's probably a little bit of misunderstanding of the different studies. Is the biopsy a new addition to the current ataluren study?
No, it's not.
No. Okay.
These are three completely different studies. So study 41 will not have biopsy, while the two new studies are study 45 and 46, and this will be in the younger boys, and they will have either one biopsy if the boy is already on ataluren, or two biopsies if the boy has never taken ataluren before.
And is MRI part of study 041?
Yes.
Okay.
So a subset of sites, the selected sites that were able and had the right equipment, they will do some MRIs at the beginning and the end of treatment. So not necessarily every boy that is enrolled in 41 will do the MRI. It depends on what site the boy is enrolled at.
Okay. So I just want to make sure everyone understands that you can be in study 041, no biopsies, and these dystrophin studies
definitely no biopsies.
Separate. They're separate studies. Yeah. Okay.
And MRI, you have to know depending on what site is the boy enrolled at.
Okay. Can a child with EDMD with a nonsense mutation be a candidate for the study?
Say it again.
Can a child with EDMD with a nonsense mutation be a candidate for the study?
Yes, we will review the genetic report and then let the boy know, let the family know. It will have to be reviewed internally. We have geneticists that make sure that whatever mutation is causing DMD is responding to ataluren treatment.
Okay. And are the boys in the dystrophin studies after the 40-week period, especially for the dystrophin naive one, are they? Is there an open label? Do they get to go into an open label trial?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
They'll be followed, and their treatment will be continued most likely under one of the ongoing long-term extension studies.
Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions that have come in. I think we're all very appreciative of the work that PTC is doing and trying to get at these answers. And we know that it takes a long time, but we have to do it right. So we can get to the answers. Let's see, I'm just seeing. And EMD, Emery-Dreifuss muscular dystrophy is the EDMD. So I guess we have a little 17 minutes left, and we will return 17 minutes to everyone's day unless there's any last-minute questions. And would you like to make a final closing remark?
No, I definitely want to thank everybody for attending this and for the help we constantly support we constantly get from all the parents and then from the PPMG as well.
Well, we definitely appreciate all you do too. So everybody, if you have other questions, just send them in and we'll get them answered. And probably in 3 or 4 days, we'll get this webinar up on our site. And we hope you have a good day. So thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.